were important ultimately to how kids do and whether teachers stay. And we can see from the data that many schools and systems may have trouble having these conversations, and why having some of the facilitation that's gone on across the state with the coalition partners is so essential, and I'm looking forward to hearing how some of those conversations went. Thank you.
Thank you. Did you want to make a comment, Commissioner?
Well, yes, apologize for having been out of the room. Did you show slide 23, Eric?
He did, on professional development,
Could you just flip back to that very quickly?
I think we did everything very quickly.
Yeah. Just to point out to the board, this is a really provocative finding. Compares the perceptions of teachers in Massachusetts to those in other states about the kind of professional development that they're experiencing. I found this hugely provocative. I mean, a lot of this data is provocative, but I wanted to call out this particular slide. Very few teachers are reporting that they're receiving PD that includes follow-up to help them with improvement on their teaching. Less than half are reporting that they're getting PD that helps them with knowledge and skills that are most needed to teach effectively. And not only are those numbers low, but compared to other states, what other states are reporting, they're lower. Which is really, again, very provocative. And the reason I'm calling this out to the board is, again, part of what I'm trying to accomplish with the reorganization of the board and with the budget process and the budget that you adopted earlier was to try to beef up our presence, more systematic, deliberate approach statewide in terms of providing PD opportunities and so forth. And I just wanted to kind of give you some data that to me reinforces the need for us to be more deliberate in the Commonwealth in this regard.
Yes, yes, Sandra. How would you prefer? We have 45 minutes for this section, so would you like to take a few questions now, Eric, or do you want to wait till everyone's finished speaking on the panel? I think we might have to go through Sandra, but I promise you'll get a question of Eric. Go. Okay. All right. Who's speaking next? I'm afraid. Hi, Joan.
Good morning. My name is Joan Conley. I currently work at the Harvard Graduate School of Education in the role of Academic Director of Professional Programs in Education. I also am involved with a number of projects here at DESE. In June of 2007, I retired from the position of Superintendent of the Malden Public Schools. Prior to that, I served as Superintendent of the Winthrop Public Schools. And in light of the earlier agenda item, I also would want to add that I proudly served prior to going to Winthrop as principal of O'Malley Middle School in Gloucester, a good school and a great community. I've had the opportunity to participate in the TELS project as a trainer. Last summer, I was paired with Jane Meller, a retired teacher from the Amherst Public Schools. We worked with one of the pilot teams, a group from the Marlborough Public Schools. I also worked with a cross-district group who came together several weeks ago to analyze some of their district data in preparation for crafting a message for all of their stakeholders when the data is released publicly after today. Based on the training that I received in preparation to do this work, and from the experiences with the union management teams who came together to analyze and understand their district data, I would like to share two observations with you this morning. First of all, the information contained in the surveys is very useful to be used as one more tool in the ongoing process of change and improvement in schools and in school districts. Obviously, the more teachers who participated in sharing their perceptions in a district, the more meaningful the data. The model of data analysis followed by the development of an action plan by a union management team for improvement in an identified area or areas that was used in the pilot districts is clearly the optimum way of efficiently and effectively using the data. I also think, though, that there is data and meaning to be found by teams from districts where there was not a high level of participation by teachers. Searching for understanding and answers to why educators from a district or certain schools within a district chose not to have their voices heard in this way could uncover issues and conditions that need to be called out for examination, discussion, and improvement planning. My second observation has to do with the work of the union management teams as they move beyond the work involved with the TELS data. We know that each team involved in the pilot districts developed meaningful action plans based on their analysis of the information provided by teachers who completed the surveys. I know that in the district where Jane and I work, this collaborative process was new to most of the district participants. They finished their plan with high hopes and positive expectations for implementation. The real success, however, of this project will be if the teams are able to apply their newly learned skills in collaboration and joint decision-making in dealing with other issues, perhaps of a more thorny nature, in their schools and districts. If there is carryover in confronting other areas in the life and culture of their schools, and evidence that the same way of looking at sometimes tough information and having the ability and willingness to have the difficult conversations necessary to craft action plans and solutions that support children, families, and educators, then we really will have something here that will prove to be a very useful tool to bring about the dramatic improvements that we need to make in all of our schools. Thank you.
My name's Tony Sabella. I'm actually one of the teachers employed in the Everett Public Schools here in place of Kim Auger, president of the EPA Association. She was not able to be here today. As part of a member of the team, we came together last summer on our own time, and a group of us met from central administration, principals, all the way down to classroom teachers. This experience allowed for collaboration and open lines of communication for school improvement and decision making. With the survey, the findings indicated there were 3 areas in need of improvement that we were able to look at. One being professional development that was discussed earlier, technology and trust. With professional development, in the past with the Everett Everett Public School, there were timelines that were not conducive to quality professional development. The topics were topics that were decided by administration, not by everybody making the decision making. Presently, since looking at the survey and the changes that have been made, there's been allotment for and allowed for input decision making. We've created in the school system a teacher university 2 days out of the year at Everett High School that involved or included a variety of topics and included outside sources coming in, teachers and administrators alike that got involved in teaching the courses itself. It's been nothing but positive feedback back to Kim Auger, the Everett Teachers Association president. Me being as a classroom teacher and talking to my colleagues, everybody's been thrilled with that change, and it looks like it's going to continue, so we're all excited about that for the forthcoming years. The other thing that we saw as an issue that needed improvement was technology, and we discovered that again through the TELS survey because of the shortcomings of the participation rate due to accessibility or availability of computers in the classrooms for the teachers to all be able to complete the survey. Again, with this survey and the team put together, we've corrected that situation as well, and every teacher has now been replaced with a computer in every classroom so that we do have the accessibility. The last thing was trust. In the past few years in the community of Everett, there's been a lot of change, a lot of turnover with administrators at the central level in the principal level. And so there's been apprehension amongst the classroom teachers and employees. The open lines of communication were not there. Now at this point, after reviewing the surveys again, there's follow through with the open lines of communication and decision making, and people are more willing to discuss and share. And with all this being said, steps have been taken because of this tool that was used to create a real positive learning environment. And again, staff on board are very excited about it and feel much more comfortable about coming together and discussing issues and sharing ideas. So it's been a real positive situation.
Great, thank you.
Morning. My name is Kelly Klopp. I'm the principal of a K-4 elementary school in Lowell, Massachusetts. We serve over 57% of our students are English language learners, and I've been there for 6 years. I, prior to that, taught as a elementary teacher in Newton. So I went from one very different community to another community, but I've loved both experiences very much and have benefited from being in both experiences. The TEL survey for us was very interesting because we had already been doing surveys with our staff on a regular basis, on a yearly basis, checking in with staff on different issues revolving around trust, revolving around academic support, professional development. And so for us, a lot of it was reaffirming in terms of some of the things we had already been putting in place and feedback that we've been hearing from teachers. But we also learned a lot about the issue of professional development follow-up. Our data was consistent with the district as well as with the state in terms of our teachers requesting that they have more professional development follow-up. And it was great for us because when we got the survey, when we got the TELS data back, we sat with our staff and we had a very open conversation about what was working well and what wasn't. And I think that the most important piece for us as schools is that we use this information to learn about each other and to be able to work in collaboration with one another on the best interest of children. And I think you do that when you don't take it personally and you use this information in a way that's really going to serve children. And we hear from teachers because they are our experts and they are the people that are in front of our children each and every day. So it was very powerful for us because a lot of the information that teachers shared with us was very honest. And again, it was information I had heard before, and information that we tried to use to create a more trusting, collaborative culture in our school. And I think that teachers believe that and understand that if you follow that up with real conversations and real work in terms of what you do daily and how you present yourselves in terms of your professional development opportunities as well as really listening to your teachers. And I think that's what's really helped us is to open up the doors of communication and really build that trust. That's so important because without that I don't think any of this would matter. And the teachers really do need to be heard and really do need to be supported day in and day out in the hard work they do. And so for us it was just another way to really continue the conversations, the important conversations about what they need and how we need to help provide that for them and for our students.
Thank you, Kelly. Well, as I thank the entire panel for their very thoughtful and informative remarks, I'm going to open it up for the board to have some questions. We have about 15 minutes. This board is very grateful for you being with us today. In particular, member Ruth Kaplan is always chiding us. We need to hear from the teachers, and here we have a lot of data from the teachers. So I know I have some questions, but Sandra had asked to ask a question earlier, so I'm going to let you... No, please, go ahead. I'd love to be bumped.
Arguing with you about those
I don't like to argue either.
But I want to ask a number of questions, and I speak not just as a board member, but also as someone who has done educational research for many years. The question of professional development that was mentioned by the commissioner before, I want to follow up on, because there are some issues for me. One general issue is, indeed, these are teachers' perceptions, and they're not necessarily realities. There's often a gap between perception and reality. when you ask teachers what they like, that's their perception, and that's fine. I'm not asking for another reality for that. But when teachers indicate, as on page 23, that wherever the state is, that they have been provided with knowledge and skills needed to teach effectively, the problem is there aren't empirical data to support those perceptions in general. The National Math Panel, for example, had an exhaustive survey, and this was done under Deborah Lowenberg-Ball's direction. I was not part of that particular exhaustive survey of the high-quality research on professional development, and indeed found that most of it was so poorly designed in terms of I'm not telling you anything new, I'm sure, evaluative studies, that it was not possible to make any relationship or to tease out any relationship basically between professional development and student achievement. In other words, we know extremely little about the conditions under which effective professional development can be designed. So the question of whether teachers perceive it to be valuable is interesting in itself, but it doesn't mean that necessarily it's had an effect on student achievement. There's simply nothing out there to suggest indeed it has. And the problem is to figure out a very difficult issue. How do you develop research designs that show indeed that what teachers have received does have an effect in some way on student achievement, independent of what teachers report? It's the middle piece of it. So the general issue is a perceptual study that in many cases leaves out how you triangulate data so that you actually have support. Another issue that's important here in Massachusetts, that one was a more general one that would cover other states beside this state. I noticed that in the report itself it says 9 out of 10 teachers believe that their school systems are aligned with all of our curriculum frameworks. But it turns out from HQA reports that at least 67 major school systems do not have alignment with our curriculum frameworks. So the question is, here is one reality, here's a perceptual approach. How do we know that they are indeed aligned? Teachers perceive, and then there's an independent body that looks and says, no, they're not aligned. So we have a problem in going along with perceptual data just by itself unless, and there are other areas. And I don't want to occupy all of this time, but I'm just trying to make the point that there is a problem with knowing what the reality really is before we start to say, oh, this is something we should be doing something with policy-wise, because that's where I'm leading to. This is not, as you cautioned, the basis for going into policy. I would want to make sure that we are, just as we've had with several other earlier documents that we received, make sure that we have an empirical basis for indeed ensuring that what we think might work actually has some research evidence behind it. So that's, to me, very important to just have as a general caution about it. I would just also like to add, then I'll stop, I would have preferred to see raw numbers rather than just percentages. This is a question of how you report your data. I see lots of percentages here. I have no sense of what the numbers. I look on page 19, new teachers. What numbers are we talking about? How many new teachers do we have? And if teachers say X, whatever here, 30% never had any planning with their mentor. This is useful information, but how many teachers are we talking about for those in your survey? I don't know. It's just that how we understand the data depends a lot on the actual numbers that go with these percentages throughout. And I'm just sorry that we don't have percentages in which to, numbers to go with percentages so that we really have a better understanding.
Okay. Eric, did you want to make a comment? And then Jeff?
Yes, I'd love to. The data on induction is from 4,756 beginning educators who were surveyed, which is on page 13 of the report. So we certainly made reference
Sandra.
to many of the numbers, and we're happy to share those. And again, certainly the PowerPoint versus report. I guess a couple things, because I agree with many of the things you've said, in that we are clear throughout that this is a perceptual survey. to those folks filling this out. We have captured the views of 40,000 educators, and it is indeed interesting. And to have this data point comparing what we may know as best we can from other data sources to triangulate, and to see that teachers don't think they are getting follow-up for professional development. And unfortunately, we do not have other data indicators to triangulate, which is why we did this in the first place. We do not have a repository of indicators on trust, yet we have a substantial literature base to understand that these elements of trust are important, and I think we found it here. So I think you're right, it is interesting, and hopefully knowing these lenses, knowing how educators perceive their own experiences is important. What we were able to do is very broad in terms of our analyses relative to student achievement, which is look at the school level only. We could not get the honest data and information from educators unless we assured anonymity in filling out the survey. So we look at the school level. Of course, whenever you look at the school level, there are some things you can and cannot do in the research. But what we are clear, and again, we have been as transparent in the research as possible, and we are opening up the database to other researchers and hope we can all collectively learn from it, is that in schools where educators, a greater proportion of educators agree that these conditions are in place, students are learning, not all, some, and I think which of those are there. And it's the fact that I think you're right in what we hit, that the ultimate outcome of this survey is to drive a kind of school improvement conversation at the school, district, and state level. And the one thing I just want to correct is I did not say this data is not intended to be used for policy. I said it is not intended to be used for accountability. I think there are some potentially very large policy implications based on what educators have said here. And looking at this data point as one data point of multiple pieces to get a collective view of how those on the front lines, as well as all of us, view education, I think is important.
Thanks, Eric. Jeff, I know you had a question.
Yeah, it's a question about causality and whether you controlled for or can really make a clear statement about causality. If you look at page 26, slide 26.
Report or
I'm sorry, it's in the handouts, what we, page number? Well, what I have is page 26. It's in the handout. Teachers are supported, the second question or second issue, teachers are supported by the community in which they teach. Well, when students are performing poorly, that's at a lower level, 36%, than when they're performing highly. Does your research vouch for the fact that we get higher performance because teachers are supported? Or could you argue the other way around, that you get poor performance when, I'm sorry, you get poor performance, no, you get poor support when parents or community perceives low performance in the schools? Which way does that go?
Yes, go ahead, Eric.
I think that's a fantastic question. I'm going to refer you again to the report as opposed to the PowerPoint on page 18 because we have quite a discussion in here and present a model for trying to understand conditions.
So you did try to pull that apart?
Well, we're clear that with anonymous perceptual data that you're only looking at the school level, drawing causal connections, difficult to impossible. What we are saying is while controlling for the kids served, teacher characteristics and school characteristics, and we outline those in Appendix C, we can see that schools where a greater proportion of educators, while controlling for those factors, are performing more. So here's to your point. Why? Is it that this is a proxy for something else going on in the school? Are schools where teachers feel supported by families, are there other things happening? What are those parents doing? What are some of these terms like sufficient and adequate? We're not saying if you just pull this, this will occur. It's not causal, but they are significantly connected. We know in schools, while controlling for these factors where educators agree these are there, school level achievement is higher. So I think it's worthy of more research and having these types of discussions with educators to drill down and think about what appropriate policy strategies and programmatic efforts at the local, district, and potentially state level may help better understand that and get at the issues which are underlying this.
The same thing, I would point out, could be said for teacher involvement in decision-making. We might find that there's a correlation between that and high performance. But we may also find that when there's high performance, principals or administrators are more likely to involve teachers in decision-making. And when there's low performance, we may find that principals are more likely not to involve teachers as much. So, you know, you really kind of need to know what's the direction of causality there. And I'm not sure you can find that out, but if not, it should be reported more as a correlation than as something that's suggestive.
Well, and again, there are more than correlations. We have developed statistical models that let us isolate the connection between these two. That doesn't say that this causes this, but saying we can definitively say as best we can
That when this
that
happens,
when
this happens.
this is going up, this is going up.
But that's a correlation.
Well, no, because a correlation could be a number of things. I'm saying while controlling for everything I could.
Well, it's still a correlation.
Interconnection.
Even if
I
those are
think
the only
we
two.
could
Okay, it's,
go through
we'll talk
statistics.
on the break.
We will. But again, I think importantly is having these conversations and drilling down and coming up with the right strategies. And I truly hope we are doing a lot of case study work in North Carolina, looking at schools that have changed conditions the most. The thing we find that's greatest correlated, those are just correlation coefficients, with improvement is if they've had conversations about the data and use it as an improvement, a tool for school improvement.
Okay, Harneen was next. And
Could I make a comment too, Maura?
yeah, you're in line. I was going to ask to hear from you in a minute.
Thank
I
you.
missed your smiling face. Harneen, you're next.
Thank you. I think this is really interesting data, so thank you for presenting. I wasn't able to come yesterday to your presentation. And one of the things I think is fascinating is on page 33 about how principals and teachers view the conditions differently. And, you know, that's an area that it doesn't really matter if there's no causality, whatever, or what's the outcome of those two things? Is it better or worse learning? It's really about the quality of work life. And I think we've talked a lot on this board, Tom's talked a lot about how we, what policy implications are and how we work together to change the culture of schools so that teachers are viewed as more part of the professional learning team and more engaged. Joan, I know you talked to this board about it when you were in Malden as a superintendent about your approach to working with rather than doing to the teachers in the schools. And I just think from our perspective sitting here as board members that there's a lot of potential in terms of what this information could be used for on the ground level. And I don't even have, you know, lots of ideas at this point. I think the Everett and the Lowell discussions are really interesting and certainly could be replicated. And what you were saying, Joan, about, you know, really people want to know what's next with this. And you've done this piece of work, and people felt like, you know, in good faith they participated and they engaged, and now it's really up to all of us to say, okay, those complicated conversations need to happen so that that level of trust and openness and, you know, engagement amongst all the participants in those buildings need to come together to be able to really hope that it elevates something and something comes out of it. So I don't know what we're thinking as a board about what's possible or what other boards in other states are doing once this data comes out, but I think it'd be useful to think, what are we going to do next with this information? Because it's really interesting. Thank you.
Thank you. We have a lot more questions, but Harneen's is a lot like my own, and this is directed at Tony and Kelly in particular. When you see the kind of difference between the principal perception and teacher perception, and then you try and square that with the fact that over 80% of the teachers say, this is still a good place to work. Essentially, I'm not going to leave my school. Is it on the ground about the question that wasn't asked, as opposed to maybe what was in the survey? And what happens when you're trying to square those very different kinds of responses from teachers and principals? When you have a really different perception around leadership, teachers feel like they're not considered educational leaders, and yet principals say, oh yes, teachers believe that they're educational leaders. So that's one domain. And then you compare it to other parts of the survey that say, do you really, is this the place you want to work? And teachers will say overwhelmingly in the first cohort, 85%, overall this is a wonderful place to work. And we know from the graphs that leadership is an important domain here. So when you have that conversation in your working groups, do you say, what didn't we ask here? Or what's the perception? What is it we can work on? What is it that's off the table? How does it feel on the ground? I know how we do this in industry. I don't know how it's happening in the schools.
Well, I think by sitting down together and looking at the results of the surveys, open lines of communication right there, and sure how I can answer that.
Well, just getting it on the table maybe is important.
I just think as we come together, that opens the lines of communication right there, that we can see the concerns and the positives and the negatives. And, but like I said, like when we came back together last year, you have the different views, but when you come together, I think it gets out on the table right there, and that helps.
Great.
Collaborating together at that point.
Did you want to add anything, Kelly?
I can only speak for what's happening in my school at this time, but what we've tried to do is really try to build teacher leadership capacity and really hold teachers to very high standards. And one of the pieces that came out of this survey for us that I was very proud of was that 100% of our staff felt that they worked in a place that was very trusting and there was mutual respect. And I think that's something that we worked really, really hard on. And it's not just talk, it's actually how we treat people in the building and how we hold each other accountable and how we require teachers to have a strong belief system in children. And we've done a lot of work on that. And I think teachers know that if it's real and if it's authentic. And I also think that we have to really trust teachers to become the experts and to pass that baton and share the leadership role. And if principals don't have so much of an ego and have much more of a collaborative and shared leadership role in a school, I think that kind of model really helps teachers to feel that they will take on more roles and become more experts, and that will build this level of trust. But I think if you don't have that level of trust, you can never get some of these really powerful academic areas that we're talking about to really improve student work and student learning. But I think that this kind of survey has the great potential to start those conversations. Whether we say it's causal or not, these issues are there, they're real. And if the teacher doesn't feel empowered, then they're not going to give you 100% in the classroom, therefore they're not going to give it to that child. So it's us being in those classrooms and really supporting those teachers and helping them get to that next level. So that's how I see it from our perspective, and really truly working as a team and building that collaborative culture that's rich, environment for all kids and teachers.
Thank you very much. I want to, I'll give you one quick comment, Erin. Dana has a question, Ruth has a question, and if we have time, Tom, but you were here last night, so you get a double. All right, go ahead, Eric.
I just want to clarify that we did divide up hard stayers versus soft stayers in the report. So 2/3 of teachers say, I want to stay in my building as long as I'm able. Another 1 out of 5 said, I want to stay, but I would be open to other opportunities, and those educators are quite different. So while we have this 8 out of 10 saying, my school's a good place to work and learn, which is a function of love of community and kids, as well as some of these conditions, when we actually break down and look at those stayers, folks who, their real employment patterns, we do see some differences, and think about the ramifications if 1/3 of educators really did move from their school in a year.
Great, thank you. Dana?
Well, first let me say that the survey is, I think, fascinating and provides some valuable information and fodder for the development of policy. And I also, as president of a large teacher training institution, think it has implications around teacher training. But my question is really to Tony, and this is about the professional development piece. From your perspective, as someone on the ground and in the classroom, what do you think, and what do your colleagues think, is the single most important professional development issue? If there was something that around professional development that would be the most important, what would it be?
I think that it's important that we have a voice, because we are directly in the classroom. And again, it goes back to it's for the children and their education. And because we work directly in the classroom, I think we have that expertise to know what we need for professional development. And, you know, what is evident and witnessed this beginning school year is that the central administration listened and allowed for feedback, allowed for decision-making and collaboration. That made a really big difference.
Thank you. Okay, Ruth, it's your turn.
Okay. Hi, everybody. So I have a couple of questions. The longer I've been sitting here, the more questions, but I'll try to make them short. So first of all, I'm going to say all the questions, and then maybe you can, answer them. My first question was just overall, if any of you could comment on what your biggest surprise finding was, something you didn't anticipate. That was my first question. My second question is, I'm just trying to think very concretely about really how to make what you've done useful and applicable. And I sort of have my parent hat on here and thinking about an individual district, like my own children's school district. I happen to know, well, I mean, you've said this as well in your survey. There were several districts who didn't even participate in this survey, or if there was less than 40% participation rate, the results didn't get recorded. So I guess just sort of thinking about what we do, is, what the Department of Education might be able to do in this regard. Is there some way that we can try to make the use of these surveys going forward some kind of a mandatory in some way, or so that individual parents in communities can actually, and the teachers in those communities can actually, and the leaders, look at the data for their particular community, because not all communities participated in this. Otherwise, the overall results aren't necessarily useful for the individual community. And a third question is whether charter school teachers participated in this survey, and if not, is there a way that we can also do some kind of a survey for charter school teachers? So those are my three questions.
Thank you. Who wants to?
Let me get out of the way
Okay.
for the biggest surprise. I'm not surprised after 21 iterations of the survey in 12 states too often, but I am always intrigued at the differences of perception across states. So I'll answer the last one, which is charter schools were included in the survey. Our response rate was not particularly good in charter schools. I think if the survey is to be done again, certainly really working with associations and charters to bolster response rate. In other states, we've been more successful in getting charter schools to participate. We got a 61% response rate in charters in North Carolina. And in terms of getting data from those communities, I really encourage everybody, the survey is online. You can click, preview the survey, print it out. We list which questions were included in these factors that we looked at relative to achievement. And I welcome any of these systems to take those questions, go to SurveyMonkey or Zoomerang, and go on out there and find this survey or other data sources to answer them. But I want to hear the surprise question too.
I guess in Everett, in our community, one of the, I think, the surprise is that so many of the members and the faculty wanted to be involved with professional development and bring ideas to the table and actually directly facilitate the courses for their colleagues.
Mm-hmm.
Because like I said, in the past, it was mostly the decision-making was from above, and it was maybe outside resources, but at this point in time, we had lots of involvement within the system at all different levels that wanted to be involved with professional development.
I'm not sure if it was a surprise as much as it was a strong reminder to me that a lot of our staff was reminding us that we needed more professional development teaching English language learners. Because I think that we tried to do a really good job of that, but still not enough.
Mm-hmm.
And we need so many more qualified teachers that can teach our English language learners. And with all the other initiatives that teachers have to tackle, I think that that piece is really a struggle for many of our teachers. And not just for the teachers that have the license, but the teachers that don't have the license, that have children on the LOs that are 2s and beyond, and finding it very challenging beyond the initial sheltered instruction that they get to really dig deep and service our children. So it wasn't really a surprise, but it was, again, reminding me that we really need to put more resources into that. And then again, the other issue about that they received the ongoing professional development. That did surprise me somewhat, because I felt that we were doing a lot with our math and our literacy professional development. But then again, I thought about how much teachers have to do, and the breadth versus depth issue. And I think that that's just an ongoing piece that we have to really acknowledge and face, and think about how we can make the professional development worthwhile and engaging, but also manageable for teachers, because they're constantly being asked to do so much. And you know, you see people like they're on the treadmill, they're racing through trying to get to all the curriculum, and it's tough. And when you're trying to provide that professional development in a real, authentic way that can help teachers even change their practice, let alone reflect on it, it's really time-consuming, and it's a lot. So I'm always grappling with that whole notion of how we help teachers and support them with that.
Thank you.
Ruth, if I could respond to your more technical question about participation and how we might move forward and looking for a greater number of participants the next time the survey is conducted. My understanding is that in states such as North Carolina, where the survey has been administered multiple times, that participation rate does increase.
Mm-hmm.
So we know that. I think that it's less about mandating and more about having districts and boards and associations let teachers know that there is a true interest in understanding what their perceptions are and using these perceptions as a tool to change and improve schools. And I think this is one of the places where teacher training comes in, that the idea that teachers now are expected to be involved in sharing leadership and to take leadership roles on, and some training and coursework to this end, I think would be very, very valuable.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for those answers. I do hope that there is an effort made by the associations to take note of the districts that did not participate and to work in that direction that you're talking about, and hopefully, you know, in the future there could be greater participation on the part of, you know, most, if not all, districts.
Great, thanks, Ruth. I know Tom has a quick question, as does Nick, and then I'm going to have to cut it off because we're running over here. Go ahead.
Okay, I just want to comment that this is a very important piece of work and a very meaty data set, and I look forward to digging into it in a little more detail. I did go to the presentation last night, and I guess the two immediate things that I would take away from this are that are very consistent with my previous experience, are that teaching conditions are really critical, and some of the percentages that you show there are distressing, and that we really need to work hard on particularly professional development, the quality, the consistency, the follow-up. That's something we've known for a while. It's something that the board can have a lot of influence over, and we should. But beyond that, the professionalism, really making teaching into an authentic profession, empowering teachers. The survey says exactly what I've already believed. Those are very important things. The trust. And there are things that the board can do, especially if we get help from the union leadership. But the second takeaway is that comes through here loud and clear is the importance of the leadership. And you can't get the professionalism and the empowerment and all the other things you want if you don't have strong and high-quality leadership. And that's not only in the building, but in the district administration, and it's not only the principal, but it's other people in the building. And we are currently sponsoring some professional development on leadership, but you can't create leadership with professional development. You can nurture it, you can help in a number of ways, but you get leadership through recruiting and hiring and promoting people who have real leadership qualities and who have demonstrated performance and so on. And unfortunately, that doesn't happen everywhere. And some of the places where it doesn't happen are the ones that have the worst student achievement figures. And that is an area where the board has less influence. Because of the local control, we don't have a lot of leverage on that, and I think that's something, and maybe Carla's going to have something in the next tab to say about that, but that's an area that we really need to find a way to get some leverage on that.
Thank you, Tom. Nick?
Sure, just a quick comment. Secretary Revel asked that I express his support for the survey, and that our office was pleased to support it, and I think it was funded in a supplementary budget last summer. And his view that it's a rich source of data on teachers' views of the conditions in which they work to support students, and as a potential source of data to guide policy, as we've seen in North Carolina and other states, and it commends all the partners who worked on making it an effective research project.
Thank you, Nick. With that, I'm going to thank Kelly and Tony and Joan and Beverly and Eric. Eric, especially, thank you for your national view on all of this. We really appreciated you being with us. We appreciate the work you're doing on the front lines. So thank you very much. There'll be a lot more. As Eric said last night, let 1,000 dissertations bloom. So I hope they do. I'm going to give the break a 5-minute bio break. And so we'll reconvene at 25 minutes of 12. We have we're already significantly behind time. So as I introduce the next topic on our agenda, I want to remind folks we have a lot of meat left in this board meeting, so we're going to have to pick up the pace. So next on our agenda is updating the board on the state education budget, and I'm going to ask the commissioner to take us through that discussion. We all set?
We are, and you know what? I'm actually going to turn to Nick Martinelli on behalf of the Secretary of Education to open this, and then I'd like to follow up the observations that Nick brings.
Sure. As many of you are aware, Governor Patrick appointed Jeff Simon to lead the effort with the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, the federal stimulus bill, to ensure the transparency and accountability as those funds are received and spent. The purpose of Governor Patrick and Secretary Revel's meeting today with Secretary Duncan in Washington, D.C. is to urge Secretary Duncan to create an expedited and streamlined process to release the state stabilization funds, which is a portion of the federal stimulus money, which amounts to a little less than $1 billion. And I think Commissioner Chester may go through some of the other pots of money in the federal stimulus bill that are dedicated to education, and also to flag a couple programs within that bill that are consistent with the state's goals in education.
Thank you. Behind tab 2, you have an update on the budget. You may recall that when we met in January, the House 1 budget, the governor's budget proposal, had not yet been introduced, and so I want to spend a little bit of time on that. I want to pick up where Nick left off, though, first, because obviously everybody's very tuned in to what's in the federal stimulus package, I think we're playing a little bit of tag team with Washington. I'll be in Washington tomorrow, meeting with Secretary Duncan and officials from the U.S. Department of Ed, again, trying to figure out the ground rules for these funds. It appears that each state is going to have to provide a set of assurances to the federal government in order to receive the education funds. It looks like those assurances will have to include a state's commitment to high standards, to implementing P16 data systems, to promoting teacher advancement and improvement initiatives, and also to promoting equitable distribution of teachers. So again, that's something that we'll probably hear more about. There are several major pots of money on the education side, and just focused on the K-12 sector, because there are pots also for higher ed. But the three largest by far for us would be Title I, where we expect to receive about $160 million spread over 2 years. IDEA, special ed funding, where we expect to receive about $280 million spread over 2 years. Not 280 per year, but combined over the 2 years. And then there's the fiscal stabilization pot that Nick referenced, which gives a fair amount of discretion to governors. Again, a little unclear as to how that'll flow, how quickly it'll flow, what kind of assurances have to be provided. But governors have discretion in applying it to the K-12 sector, to the higher ed sector. Little less clear about the preschool sector, although I guess we're trying to get some clarity on that, as well as potential for some funds for school construction coming out of that. In addition, the U.S. Secretary of Education has some discretion about floating some competitive grants out of the stabilization fund. So again, we're looking forward to hearing more about those opportunities. So all that is to give you a very quick update on the federal stimulus piece. What I'd like to do is turn to the state budget, and you have a memorandum from me. We've already shared with you the fact, or actually this is updated since your January meeting. This year's budget in total for Department of Elementary and Secondary Education will have received a cut of $37.4 million off of the original allocation. The proposal for 2010 for next year's budget out of the House 1 budget pairs the reduced level at which we're currently funded by another $28.8 million for a total reduction in the proposed budget for 2010 of over $66 million from what was initially allocated, appropriated for the current fiscal year. Now that comes through non-Chapter 70 accounts. Chapter 70 in the governor's budget is kept level funded, and there were no cuts to that. There are two basic ways in which the governor is proposing that this be accomplished. One is a statewide information technology consolidation initiative, and I gave you a little bit of a flavor of that. This initiative, as we understand it, would occur in two stages. An initial stage would put the Secretary of Education overseeing higher ed, K-12, and early education and CARES, IT initiatives. And then in the second stage, all agency IT initiatives would be consolidated under the statewide IT department, as we understand it. The second way in which the House 1 budget achieves the reduction in expenditure is a consolidation of many of the department's similar programs into substantially fewer consolidated programs. Now, some of this is very consistent with the budget that the board voted on, and I want to, if you don't have your book open, I want to make sure you're looking at tab 2. Behind tab 2, there's two budgets that we've provided you. The first budget shows you the consolidations in the governor's proposed budget. The second budget, which is the last 2 pages before tab 3, is the budget that you adopted, that you forwarded back in November or December. November. And so looking at the governor's proposed budget, for example, the consolidation of the current 3 literacy lines into 1 literacy line is recommended by the governor, consistent with the recommendation that you made, in fact, as a State Board of Education. The funding is substantially lower. The proposal is for $4.5 million of funding for those consolidated literacy lines. In the current budget, they were initially funded at $8 million, and then with the 9C reductions, it went to $6.6 million. So the consolidation in this case, as we read it, would in fact accomplish providing the department with a pot of money to spend on statewide literacy improvement initiatives, something that we currently don't have very much ability to execute because we don't have access to those funding lines. They're pretty much targeted, earmarked to specific recipients. There are many other consolidations in the governor's proposed budget. We've laid those out for you. I'm not going to take you through all of them, but I am going to point you to one other because this then leads into the discussion of the history piece, which is also on your agenda. So if you look on page 1 of the analysis of our funding based on the governor's consolidated House 1 budget. So I hope everybody's in this spot. If you look to the second the third set of lines, which it has in blue type 7010-0027, student assessment and related remediation. You can see that the governor in his budget has proposed consolidating what are currently 3 different lines in the current budget. Certificate of Occupational Proficiency, Student Assessment, this is our MCAS budget, and then supports to close the achievement gap, which are in large measure funds that we flow to school districts to let them run academic intervention for students who have not passed the MCAS. We're still working on the graduation requirements through the competency determination. You can see in the columns that when this year's budget was initially passed, in total those were funded at $44 million. With the 9C cuts, it was reduced to $41, almost $42 million in total, and you can see what each line is funded at, with the student MCAS funded at $28 million. Well, the governor's proposal would combine those 3 lines into one consolidated line to cover those 3 functions and would fund it at $36.6 million, a reduction of over $5 million from current levels of appropriation. And as you'll see when we get into the MCAS discussion, this is part of the cause of my concern about our ability and school districts' ability to support the addition of the history MCAS. But this is just a brief overview of where this budget stands now. Tony DiLorenzo's here. This is now in the legislature's hands. The legislature will then come up with their own proposal for a budget, and that will have to get reconciled. Tony, I don't know if you want to add anything.
Hopefully by the March meeting, we will have the House Ways and Means budget to present to you, and see whether the House concurs with the governor's recommendations on the consolidation. So hopefully March will have those numbers for you.
Any questions for the commissioner or for Tony about the budget and the proposed changes?
Not the changes. I just wanted to clarify about the literacy programs. You're saying that they still are tagged for the specific programs. For example, reading recovery was mentioned here. I'm looking at early tutorial literacy. the legislature has still got it targeted for only reading recovery. I mean, I'm not sure which page I should be looking at.
Yeah.
Or whether there's a possible chance that it could be lifted from reading recovery so that it could then be more flexible
Right.
in the way this money is used, which would make all the difference in the
Right.
world, because that is the big, well, not the biggest, but
Right.
second biggest piece
Right.
here. It seems to me
No.
this is something that should be fought for if we're going to have this consolidation. Otherwise, it's meaningless. The
Right.
consolidation doesn't amount to anything if you've still got it targeted for
Right.
the same issue.
Well, couple points, Sandra. The governor has endorsed the board's recommendation. So the governor has proposed consolidating what are currently 3 different lines into one line. It's not the legislature's at this point. This is the governor's recommendation. The budgetary language, as we read it, still identifies Bay State reading and early tutorial literacy reading recovery in language, but does not specify an amount, which, as we read that, says that we have authorization to spend money with those entities, but that we're not obligated to spend money with those entities.
So that means that you wouldn't have to spend the 2.2 or whatever figure I'm supposed to look at.
That's-
say, only on reading recovery, that it might be spendable.
That's-
things that actually have better.
That's correct. And again, this is the House 1 proposal, which has yet to be taken up by the legislature.
Yes, Jeff?
In the 70-10, in the student assessment and remediation category, I'm looking at supports to close the achievement gap, and I heard you say that money was dedicated to districts to help them remove people from the failing category, something to that effect. When it gets consolidated in this way, presumably the commissioner now has a lot more discretion in moving that money between categories, or is that an incorrect assumption?
No, that is a correct assumption. That's the upside, right? And the reason I called out that specific consolidation, again, goes to my recommendation on the history MCAS. If you look at what we requested and the State Board endorsed, if you go to the last page before tab 3 for the MCAS line, we asked for $34 million for the testing line alone, without remediation, which was our best estimate of the cost of running MCAS, assuming that history and social science were fully implemented next year. So what the